The first thing you lose in prison is time. Not the days or years, I mean time. You stop feeling its rhythm. Seconds bleed into minutes, which smudge into hours, until all you're left with is a void, a pulsing, suffocating nothingness. Time stops meaning anything, and then you stop meaning anything. That's where I was when the guards came for me. "Ethan Kade," one barked, his voice sharp enough to make me flinch. It wasn't the tone of authority that got to me. It was the name. Mine, spoken aloud, a sound I hadn't heard in months. I shuffled out of my cell, chains rattling around my wrists like a macabre drumbeat. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, throwing their sterile glow across the cracked concrete walls. Two guards flanked me, guiding me through the labyrinth of steel bars and despair that made up Everlock Correctional Facility. My sentence, life without parole for second-degree murder. My crime, a moment of rage that spiraled out of control. It wasn't premeditated, it wasn't calculated, but it happened. A bar fight, over something I can't even remember. One punch too many, and suddenly everything spiraled. I was pulling out my gun, the anger blinding me, and then she jumped in. I don't even know how she appeared. One moment it was chaos, fists flying, and the next, she was there. I shot. The bullet wasn't meant for her, but it found her anyway. They told me her name in court. I wish I could say I remembered it, but I didn't. All I remember are her eyes when it was over. The judge's words still echoed in my mind. "You've shown no regard for the sanctity of life. You will spend the rest of your days in confinement." I didn't consider myself a monster. But then, no one ever does. The warden's proposition. They brought me to the warden's office. I'd only seen it once before, the day they handed down my sentence. Back then, it felt like a death chamber disguised as a bureaucracy. Now, it felt worse, like a door creaking open to something I couldn't name. The warden was a slim man with sharp features and a perpetually unreadable expression. His suit was immaculate, as though he floated above the grime of the prison he ran. Sitting across from him was a woman I didn't recognize. "Ethan," the warden began, his tone deceptively soft. "This is Dr. Alina Soren. She's here to offer you an alternative." Dr. Soren turned toward me, her gaze slicing through the air like a scalpel. She was tall, her features elegant but clinical, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see through my skin. Her smile was small and tight, less reassurance, more performance.
"Mr. Kade,"
she said, her voice calm and measured.
"you've been selected for a new program, one that could change the course of your life."
"Yeah," I muttered, already suspicious. "What's the catch?"
No catch, just a choice. You can serve the remainder of your life sentence here at Everlock, or
She leaned forward, folding her hands on the table.
you can undergo rehabilitation through our experimental Cognify program, a process that will take minutes.
"Minutes?" I repeated, incredulous. Dr. Soren nodded.
Instead of spending the rest of your life in a cell, you could walk out of here within the hour.
The words hung in the air like a lit fuse. The guards shifted uncomfortably behind me, as though they'd heard this pitch before and didn't like what followed. "What's the catch?" I asked again, my voice harder this time. Dr. Soren's smile didn't falter.
Cognify is a cutting-edge technology. It works by implanting artificial memories into the subject's brain, memories designed to rehabilitate. You'll relive the consequences of your actions, experience them from your victim's perspective, and gain a profound understanding of the harm you caused. The process is deeply immersive and entirely safe.
"Safe?" I scoffed. "You're talking about messing with my head." Her expression darkened slightly.
Would you rather spend the rest of your life behind bars? The choice is yours, Mr. Kade, but consider this. Rehabilitation isn't about punishment, it's about growth, redemption. Cognify offers you that chance.
I glanced at the warden, who had remained silent, watching the exchange like a hawk. His eyes bored into mine, unblinking. "Why me?" I asked finally. "Why not someone else?"
Because
Dr. Soren said, her voice taking on an almost predatory edge.
you're ideal, young enough to reintegrate into society, intelligent enough to process the memories, And most importantly, your crime makes you the perfect candidate for empathy reconstruction.
Empathy reconstruction. The words felt like acid on my tongue. They handed me a stack of papers, a contract detailing the process, risks, and benefits of the Cognify program. I skimmed it, though the words blurred together. Dr. Soren explained each clause in clinical detail, but I could barely focus. What stood out were the phrases, artificial memory implantation, long-term personality modification, no reversal after completion.
This isn't a free pass.
Dr. Soren warned as I hesitated over the dotted line.
The process is intense. You'll feel things you've never felt before, pain, guilt, regret. But you'll leave here a better man.
A better man. The phrase dug into me like a needle. I thought of the alternative. A lifetime in Everlock. A lifetime of gray walls and cold stares. A lifetime of nothing. With a shaking hand, I signed my name. The room they led me to wasn't what I expected. I'd pictured something sterile and futuristic, but it was oddly serene. The walls were painted in soft blues and greens, and the faint sound of running water played in the background. A reclining chair sat in the center, surrounded by monitors and machinery. "Lie back," a technician instructed. I did as I was told, my body tense as they strapped me in. Electrodes were attached to my temples, and a sleek, helmet-like device was lowered onto my head. The hum of the machinery filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. Dr. Soren appeared at the edge of my vision, her face calm but unreadable.
This will feel strange at first, but trust the process. You'll come out the other side, changed.
Before I could respond, the helmet lit up and my world dissolved into white. The first sensation was warmth. Not the sterile chill of the prison cell or the cold hum of the Cognify device, but something alive. Sunlight poured through an open window, spilling over my skin like a balm. My hands, it took me a moment to realize they weren't my hands, rested on a fabric that felt impossibly soft. A floral dress. My hands, her hands, smoothed it absently as I gazed down. It fit perfectly, flowing with elegance. The sensation was alien yet natural, as if it had always been mine. And then I heard it. "Mom, where's my backpack?" The voice was high-pitched and impatient, cutting through the gentle peace of the moment like a splash of cold water.
"I don't know, did you check by the couch?" I shouted back. I froze as the words left my mouth. It wasn't my voice. It was hers. Warm, quick, familiar. A mother's voice. Footsteps thundered toward me. A boy of about 9 skidded into the room, his hair sticking up in every direction, a smear of peanut butter on his cheek. "I checked. It's not there." "Jacob, calm down," I said, the name spilling from my lips automatically. "I'm sure it's somewhere. Did you check your room?" "Ugh, fine." He turned and bolted back down the hallway, leaving a trail of chaos in his wake. "Don't run!" I called after him, even as I heard another voice behind me. "Mom, Jacob's taking my pencils again." This time it was a girl, younger, 6, maybe 7, clutching a stuffed rabbit in one hand and glaring down the hallway where her brother had disappeared. Her hair was braided neatly, and she wore a pink shirt with glittery stars on it. My heart clenched. The girl's face was so open, so alive, so filled with indignation over something as small as a few missing pencils. I smiled, her smile, without thinking. "Did you ask nicely for him to give them back, Lily?" She pouted. "He doesn't listen to me. I'll talk to him later, okay?" I promised. "Go grab your shoes. The bus will be here soon." As Lily scampered off, I caught my reflection in the glass of a framed photo on the wall. My face stared back. Full cheeks flushed with color, framed by wavy auburn hair. Her eyes, vivid green, sparkled with warmth. I felt a strange, overwhelming ache in my chest. The morning was a whirlwind of activity, toast popping out of the toaster, a carton of milk spilling across the counter, arguments over who got to sit by the window on the school bus. And yet, it was beautiful. The house was modest but cozy, filled with personal touches. Brightly colored drawings taped to the fridge, mismatched mugs in the cabinet, a pair of tiny sneakers kicked under the dining table. It wasn't perfect. It was cluttered, chaotic, alive. I watched as Jacob and Lily bickered over breakfast, each accusing the other of taking something they didn't. I wanted to laugh, but instead I felt an unfamiliar pang, a sense of protectiveness. These were her children, my children. They were hers, but the longer I stayed in this moment, the more they felt like mine. After the bus pulled away, leaving behind only the sound of gravel crunching under its tires, the house felt still for the first time all morning. I leaned against the doorway, sipping coffee out of a chipped blue mug, and marveled at the quiet. Her memories, my memories, guided me effortlessly through the day. Laundry in the morning, folded in neat piles on the couch, a trip to the grocery store, smiling at familiar faces who waved from across the aisles, picking up fresh produce, selecting the ripest strawberries with practiced ease. Every moment was filled with purpose. Every task, no matter how small, carried a sense of love and care. In the afternoon, I sat at a small desk in the corner of the living room, poring over bills and schedules. Renee worked part-time from home, juggling responsibilities with a skill that felt automatic. I answered an email about an upcoming PTA meeting, her fingers, my fingers, flying over the keyboard as if I'd done this 100 times before. Later, I stood in the backyard, a garden brimming with color and life stretching out before me. The air was warm, and the scent of lavender and freshly cut grass filled my lungs. I crouched to pull weeds, my hands moving with practiced ease. Dirt clung to my fingers, earthy and grounding. I felt a sense of pride in the garden's order, its beauty, a reflection of the life she had built here. "Renee, those tomatoes are going to be perfect." I turned to see Mrs. Coates, the elderly woman next door, leaning over the fence with a bright smile. "Thanks," I said, wiping the sweat from my brow. The words felt natural, unforced. She chuckled. "Lily's been telling me all about her science project. That little girl of yours is a genius." I laughed, a sound that startled me with its sincerity. She's always full of ideas. Love in the quiet moments. By evening, the house was alive again, filled with the sounds of laughter and the clatter of dinner plates. Jacob and Lily argued over the last roll, while I shook my head with mock exasperation. After the kids were in bed, I stood in the doorway of Lily's room, watching her sleep. Her small hand clutched the stuffed rabbit, her chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. I reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, and the motion sent a pang through my heart. In Jacob's room, the chaos of the day seemed far away. He sprawled across his bed, one arm dangling over the edge, snoring softly. I picked up a book from the floor and placed it on the shelf. As I closed the door, I lingered for a moment, feeling the weight of what this all meant. This wasn't just a life. It was a family. A world held together by love and resilience. For a moment, I let myself forget who I was. I let myself be her. Renee, the woman with 2 children who adored her. A home filled with warmth and laughter. A future brimming with possibilities. But it didn't last. It came back in flashes, like cracks splintering across a perfect pane of glass. Lily's laugh. The way Jacob called her mom. The sound of their voices echoing through the house. Each moment was a reminder of what I had taken. I wasn't her. I didn't belong here. I was Ethan Kade, the man who had killed her. The realization hit me like a fist to the gut, and the world around me began to waver. The warm hues of the house dimmed, and the edges of the room sharpened unnaturally. The hum of Cognify machinery bled into the memory, faint but insistent. "No," I whispered, clutching the edge of the kitchen counter. The sensation was overwhelming, a pulling, a tearing, as if my very sense of self was unraveling. The garden, the laughter, the love, it all faded into a cold, sterile white. And then the memory shifted.
The warmth was gone. Cold air blasted my skin as the light faded, leaving me gasping for breath. The chair beneath me felt foreign, the straps digging into my wrists and ankles. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, a desperate rhythm that refused to slow. The world around me was painfully sharp. The clean lines of the room, the hum of machinery, the metallic taste of fear lingering on my tongue.
You're back.
Dr. Soren's voice cut through the haze, calm, clinical, detached. I blinked, disoriented, my eyes adjusting to the harsh fluorescent light overhead. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. The garden, the laughter, the warmth of the children's hugs. It was all gone. In its place was the cold sterility of the Cognify facility.
How was it?
She asked, clipboard in hand. Her tone was soft, almost kind, but there was something calculating in the way her eyes studied me, like I was a specimen under a microscope. I opened my mouth to speak, but my throat felt raw, as if I'd been screaming. I swallowed hard and tried again. It felt real, I managed. My voice was hoarse, trembling.
Go on.
She encouraged, taking a step closer. I closed my eyes, trying to steady myself. I was her. I was Renee. It wasn't just seeing or hearing. It was everything. The sunlight on my skin, the smell of flowers in the garden, the way her daughter's hair felt when I tucked it behind her ear. My breath hitched, and I shook my head. It was a whole day. I lived a day in her life.
And how did it feel?
She pressed. I opened my eyes and stared at her, my hands clenching into fists against the armrests. It felt good, better than anything I've ever had. Her life was full of love, of purpose. But then, my voice cracked. Then it hit me. I'm the one who took it all away. I killed her. Dr. Soren nodded slowly, jotting something down on her clipboard.
And what did you take away from this experience?
What did I take away? I barked a laugh, the sound bitter and hollow. I took away that I'm a monster, that I don't deserve to leave this place. Her pen paused, hovering over the paper. She tilted her head slightly, studying me.
Interesting.
She murmured. I frowned. What's interesting about that?
You're focusing on the guilt, the remorse. That's good. But you're not seeing the bigger picture yet.
What bigger picture? I snapped. She stepped closer, her tone calm but firm.
That it wasn't real. 60 seconds.
I stared at her, uncomprehending. What do you mean it wasn't real? I was there. I felt everything. It was... My voice trailed off as I searched for the words. It was a day of my life. It had to be real. Dr. Soren's expression didn't change.
It wasn't. The simulation lasted exactly 60 seconds.
My stomach dropped. You're lying.
I'm not. Time in the simulation doesn't work the same as time here. The Cognify device manipulates your brain's perception, stretching moments into hours, days if necessary. What you experienced in 60 seconds felt like an entire day because your mind believed it was real.
I shook my head, disbelief flooding my veins. No, that's impossible. I talked to her kids. I made breakfast. I felt everything.
Exactly.
She said, her voice taking on a patient, almost patronizing tone.
The memories were designed to feel real. Every sensory detail, every emotion, it was all fabricated. But it wasn't reality, Mr. Kade. It was a construct, a lesson.
Her words hit me like a blow. It wasn't real. None of it was real. The laughter, the garden, the love, it was all just a simulation. I slumped back in the chair, my body suddenly heavy. If it wasn't real, I whispered, then what's the point? What's the point of making me feel all that if it's just fake? Dr. Soren's gaze hardened slightly.
The point, Mr. Kade, is for you to learn, to understand, to internalize what you took from Renee and her family, and to reflect on how you can change.
I looked up at her, my eyes burning with unshed tears. What if I can't?
You can, but only if you embrace the process. The faster you learn, the sooner you'll be released.
Released. The word dangled in front of me like a lifeline, a distant promise of freedom. But what would freedom even mean now after what I'd just experienced? Dr. Soren didn't wait for my response. She gestured to the helmet, still perched on the table beside me.
We're going back in.
The cold was familiar now. When I woke up, I wasn't in the Cognify facility. The light was dim, the air stale with the acrid smell of smoke and something metallic. My head throbbed as though I'd been punched. I sat up slowly, blinking away the haze, and realized I was back in my old apartment. The apartment hadn't changed, but somehow it felt worse. The walls seemed to lean inward, heavy with grime and peeling paint. The once beige carpet was stained with years of neglect, the air thick with the damp, sour smell of mildew. A ceiling fan creaked as it spun lazily overhead, its blades caked in dust. The sink overflowed with dirty dishes, flies buzzing over the rancid remains of forgotten meals. A trash bag slumped against the wall, torn open, spilling its contents across the linoleum floor. An empty beer can rolled under the couch as I shifted, the sound hollow in the suffocating silence. I stood, my joints stiff and aching, and stumbled toward the bathroom. The mirror above the sink was cracked, a jagged line splitting my reflection in two. My face stared back at me, gaunt and unrecognizable. Dark circles hung under bloodshot eyes, my hair sticking up in greasy clumps. I splashed water on my face, the icy sting pulling me back to reality. This was my life, the life I'd lived before prison, before the crime, before everything fell apart. I leaned against the sink, the weight of it all pressing down on me. This was my world, broken, lifeless, suffocating. I left the apartment, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't stand to be there any longer. The streets outside weren't much better. Trash littered the sidewalks, the air thick with exhaust and the faint stench of rotting food. I kept my head down as I walked, avoiding eye contact with the few people I passed. Most of them didn't look much better off than me. Hollow-eyed men shuffled down the street, their hands stuffed into worn-out jackets, their faces lined with exhaustion and defeat. The liquor store on the corner called to me, its neon sign flickering weakly in the dusk. But I didn't go in. Not yet. Not today. Instead, I found myself wandering aimlessly, my feet carrying me without direction. And then somehow I ended up there. Across the street, her house stood like a beacon. It was exactly as I remembered. The white siding gleamed in the fading sunlight, the flower boxes under the windows bursting with color. The front yard was neatly trimmed, a swing set standing proudly in the corner. Through the window, I saw her. Renee, she was in the kitchen, moving with the effortless grace of someone who belonged in a world I could never touch. Her kids were there too. Jacob sat at the table, scribbling something in a notebook, his brow furrowed in concentration. Lily twirled in the living room, her stuffed rabbit clutched tightly to her chest, her laughter ringing out like music. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my chest tight. It felt like I was intruding on something sacred, something I had no right to see. But I couldn't look away. This was her life, the life I had stolen. Hours passed before I moved again. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the house's windows glowed softly in the dark. I walked to the supermarket near her house, telling myself I needed something, anything, to justify being out. The harsh fluorescent lights inside buzzed overhead as I grabbed a basket and wandered aimlessly through the aisles. And then I saw her. Renee stood at the end of the aisle, her hand resting lightly on a cart. She was scanning the shelves, her expression calm and focused. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest, my palms slick with sweat. I knew I shouldn't, but I couldn't stop myself. My feet carried me toward her, the sound of the cart's squeaky wheel growing louder as I approached. She glanced up, and for a brief moment, her eyes met mine. "Excuse me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She smiled politely, stepping aside.
Oh, sorry. Was I in your way?
Her voice was soft, warm. It hit me like a blow, a sharp reminder of everything I had destroyed. No, it's fine, I stammered, my words fumbling over themselves. I just thought I recognized you. Her brow furrowed slightly, and for a moment, I thought she might remember me. But then her smile returned, a polite, distant thing.
I don't think we've met.
No, I guess not, I said quickly, stepping back. Sorry to bother you. She nodded, already turning back to her cart, her attention shifting away from me as easily as if I hadn't been there at all. I stood there for a long moment, staring after her, my chest tight with something I couldn't name. That night, I ended up at the bar. It was the same bar where everything had gone wrong, the same sticky floors, the same dim lights, the same tired faces nursing their drinks in silence. I sat at the counter, my fingers curling around a glass of whiskey. The burn of it down my throat was almost comforting, familiar in a way nothing else was. The guilt gnawed at me, sharp and relentless. Seeing her, hearing her voice, it was too much, too real. The alcohol didn't help. It never did. But I kept drinking, hoping to drown the weight in my chest. At some point, I got into an argument. I don't even remember what it was about. A spilled drink, maybe, or a look I didn't like. The man was loud, belligerent, his words slurred. I shoved him and he shoved back. The crowd parted around us, the tension crackling like static. And then I reached for the weapon at my hip. It was instinct, automatic, the anger boiling over into something darker, something unstoppable. I pulled it free, my hand trembling as I raised it. But the man moved, stumbling backward, and she was there. Renee. I don't know how or why she was there. Maybe she had come to talk to someone, or maybe she had been on her way home. It didn't matter. She was in the wrong place, at the wrong time. And I pulled the trigger. The sound was deafening, the recoil jolting up my arm. She fell, her body crumpling to the floor, her eyes wide with shock and pain. Everything else faded. The crowd, the man, the noise, it all disappeared. All I could see was her blood pooled beneath her, dark and spreading, staining the floor. Her chest heaved, shallow gasps escaping her lips as her eyes locked onto mine. I dropped the gun, the weight of it suddenly unbearable. I stumbled backward, my legs weak, my breath ragged. What have I done? I whispered, the words hollow, meaningless. But I knew I had killed her. Again. The simulation ended abruptly, the light snapping off as I was yanked back into the chair. I gasped for air, my chest heaving, my entire body trembling. Dr. Soren stood over me, her expression unreadable.
And?
She asked, her voice calm, detached. I couldn't speak. My throat felt tight, my chest constricted with a pain that went deeper than anything I had ever felt. She crouched slightly, meeting my eyes.
What did you take away from this one?
Tears streamed down my face as the words spilled from me raw and broken. That I'm a monster, that I destroy everything I touch. Dr. Soren nodded slowly.
And now you understand.
But I didn't, not really. All I understood was the endless weight of what I had done, and the knowledge that I could never undo it. The helmet descended again, the cold metal pressing against my temples. My heart pounded in anticipation and dread, the last simulation still a raw wound in my mind. Dr. Soren's face hovered above me, her voice calm but firm.
This time, you're going back into her life. Pay attention, feel everything, learn.
I wanted to protest, to shout that I'd already seen enough. But the words died on my tongue as the light overtook me. My body tensed, then relaxed as the world dissolved.
Warmth returned first. Soft sunlight poured through the window, a golden haze illuminating the kitchen. The hum of a coffee maker rumbled in the background, filling the air with the rich, bitter scent of freshly brewed coffee. I moved, and the motion was fluid, natural. I looked down and saw hands that weren't mine. They were hers, soft, graceful, purposeful. My reflection gleamed faintly in the glass of the refrigerator, auburn hair falling in waves, vivid green eyes, and that gentle smile that felt so foreign, yet so familiar. I was her. Again. The sounds of laughter broke through my thoughts. "Mom! Mom! Jacob won't give me the remote!" I turned toward the living room, the voice tugging at my chest in a way that felt instinctive. Lily stood with her hands on her hips, her stuffed rabbit dangling from one arm. Jacob sat on the couch, a smug grin on his face as he flipped through cartoons. "Jacob," I said, my voice calm but firm, "give your sister a turn." "Ugh, fine," Jacob groaned, tossing the remote onto the couch beside him. Lily stuck out her tongue, then flopped onto the cushions, victorious. I felt a tug at my heart, a love so deep and overwhelming that it didn't feel borrowed. It felt real. The day unfolded in a series of moments so beautiful and mundane that they felt almost sacred. Breakfast was a chaos of pancakes and spilled syrup, Jacob and Lily arguing over who got the bigger stack while I tried to mediate. The warmth of the sunlight through the kitchen window, the sound of their laughter. It filled the space with life, with love. Later, I stood in the garden, pulling weeds while the children played tag in the yard. Lily's giggles rang out as Jacob chased her, their joy infectious. I watched them, my hands in the soil, my chest swelling with a profound sense of fulfillment. This was her life, a life of love, connection, and purpose. As the afternoon sun dipped lower in the sky, I found myself at the supermarket. Jacob and Lily trailed behind me, Jacob pushing the cart and Lily clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Can we get cookies?" Lily asked, her eyes wide and hopeful. "Not this time, sweetie," I said, ruffling her hair. She pouted but didn't argue. The supermarket was bright and bustling, the hum of conversations and the clatter of carts filling the air. I moved through the aisles, picking out groceries with practiced ease, the weight of the day sitting comfortably on my shoulders. And then I saw him. He stood at the end of the aisle, staring at me with an intensity that made my breath catch. His clothes were rumpled, his hair unkempt, and his eyes, those dark, hollow eyes, felt like they were peeling back layers of my soul.
"Excuse me,"
he said, his voice low, tentative. I hesitated, then stepped aside, assuming he needed something from the shelf. "Sorry about that," I said politely, offering a small smile. But he didn't move. His gaze lingered, something unreadable flickering across his face.
"Do I know you?"
he asked. "No, I don't think so," I said, my voice steady but cautious.
"Sorry, must have been a mistake."
He muttered, stepping back quickly. He turned and walked away, his shoulders hunched, his steps heavy. I watched him go, a strange unease settling in my chest. That night the children were tucked into bed, their faces peaceful in the soft glow of their nightlights. I grabbed my keys and my coat, heading out the door for a quick drive to my mother's house. She lived just a few streets over, and I had promised to drop off a casserole dish I'd borrowed. The streets were quiet, the air cool against my skin as I walked to the car. And then I saw him again. He was standing outside the bar, his frame slouched against the wall, a cigarette dangling from his lips. The glow of the neon sign cast shadows across his face, making him look older, more weathered. He didn't notice me at first, but as I passed, his eyes snapped to mine.
"You again,"
he said, his voice slurred. He stumbled forward, the smell of alcohol thick around him. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. "Listen, I'm not trying to bother you," I said quickly, my voice steady but tinged with unease.
He
paused, his words tumbling over themselves.
I'm sorry, I'm so sorry."
I frowned, taking a step back. "Do I know you?" He laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and broken.
No, you don't, but I know you.
His words sent a chill down my spine. I turned to walk away, my steps quickening as the unease bloomed into fear. I drove to my mother's house, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached. The encounter played over and over in my mind, his voice echoing in my ears. I know you. After dropping off the casserole dish, I lingered for a moment, letting the warmth of my mother's smile and the familiarity of her home calm my nerves. But as I drove back, the bar loomed ahead, its garish neon sign cutting through the darkness. He was still there. Something compelled me to pull over. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was fear. I parked across the street, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The neon sign of the bar flickered weakly, casting faint shadows across the cracked pavement. He was sitting on the curb outside, his head buried in his hands, swaying slightly like a man lost in his own storm. I shouldn't have been here. My instincts screamed at me to drive away, to go home to my children, but I couldn't move. Something compelled me, curiosity, concern, or maybe just an inexplicable need to understand him. Through the windshield, I watched as he suddenly stood, his movements unsteady. He stumbled toward the bar's door, his silhouette a wavering shadow in the neon light. Against every instinct, I unbuckled my seatbelt and stepped out of the car, the cool night air sharp against my skin. I crossed the street, each step hesitant, the worn soles of my flats scuffing against the asphalt. The bar's door creaked open, and a wall of stale beer, cigarette smoke, and sweat hit me like a wave. The room was dimly lit, the air buzzing with quiet conversations and the occasional clink of glasses. I spotted him near the bar, hunched over a drink. His shoulders sagged under an invisible weight, his head low, the glass in his hand trembling slightly. I stayed near the door, unsure of what I was even doing there. My heartbeat quickened as I took a tentative step forward, my breath shallow. Before I could decide what to do, a loud crash shattered the low hum of the room. A stool clattered to the floor. "You think you're tough?" A man's voice snarled, cutting through the haze of conversation. My eyes darted toward the sound, and I saw him. His body tense, his face twisted with anger, squaring off against another man. The other man, tall and broad-shouldered, had one hand gripping the edge of the bar while the other jabbed toward him.
Back off.
He growled, his voice low but sharp. "You bumped into me!" the other man shouted, shoving him hard in the chest. "What's your problem?" The bar fell silent as the tension rippled through the room. He stumbled back, catching himself on a nearby table. His face was flushed, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists.
Walk away.
He muttered, his voice barely audible. "Or what?" the man taunted, stepping closer. I froze, the air crackling with danger. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to leave, to run, but my feet wouldn't move. The man shoved him again, harder this time, and he staggered back, his shoulder colliding with the wall. A low, guttural sound escaped him, a growl of frustration, anger, and something darker.
Enough.
He barked, his hand darting toward his hip. Time seemed to slow. I saw the glint of metal as he pulled the gun free, his hands trembling as he leveled it at the man's chest. The room erupted in gasps and shouts, but no one moved. My heart pounded in my chest, the blood roaring in my ears. "Don't!" I shouted, my voice cutting through the chaos. He turned to look at me, his eyes wild and unfocused, as though he didn't recognize me, or anyone for that matter. "What are you doing?" I said, taking a hesitant step forward. "You don't have to do this. Just put it down." He blinked, the words seeming to reach him, if only for a moment. His hands wavered, the barrel of the gun dipping slightly. But the man he was fighting lunged forward, shouting something unintelligible. The gun went off. The sound was deafening, reverberating through the bar like a crack of thunder. Pain exploded in my chest, sharp and all-consuming, and the world tilted sideways. I hit the ground hard, my breath hitching as a warm, wet sensation spread across my ribs. My vision blurred, the edges darkening as the pain radiated outward, my body trembling uncontrollably. The ceiling swam above me, the lights flickering in and out of focus. Somewhere, distantly, I heard someone scream. He was standing over me, the gun slipping from his hand, clattering to the floor with a hollow clang. His face was pale, his mouth open in shock, his eyes locked on mine.
No.
He whispered, his voice trembling.
No, no, no.
I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. My chest heaved, every breath shallow and ragged, the world growing dimmer with each passing second. His hands hovered over me, shaking violently as if he wanted to help but didn't know how.
What have I done? What have I done?
The last thing I saw before the darkness claimed me was his face, twisted with guilt and horror, tears streaming down his cheeks.
I woke, gasping, the straps of the Cognify chair digging into my wrists. My body trembled violently, my chest heaving as though the bullet had been real. The room was blindingly bright, the fluorescent lights stabbing into my eyes. My throat burned, and I realized I was sobbing, my hands clawing at the armrests as I tried to ground myself. Dr. Soren's voice was calm, clinical, cutting through the chaos in my mind.
What did you feel?
Tears streamed down my face as I tried to catch my breath. My voice was raw and broken as I answered, the words tumbling out. Everything. I felt everything, I whispered. The love, the joy, the fear, and the pain. My chest hitched as I stared at her, my vision blurred by tears. I felt it all. Dr. Soren nodded slowly, her expression unreadable.
And what did you learn?
I closed my eyes, the faces of her children flashing in my mind, Jacob's furrowed brow as he concentrated on his homework, Lily's laughter as she twirled in the living room. That, I took it all away, I said, my voice trembling. That I destroyed everything. Dr. Soren's gaze softened, if only slightly.
Good. That's a start.
But it didn't feel like a start. It felt like the end. Dr. Soren stood nearby, clipboard in hand, watching me as if I were a specimen under a microscope. I turned to her, my voice cracking. It's not just memories, I said, my words spilling out in a rush. It's real. It feels real. I was her. I felt everything. Everything she loved. Everything she feared.
That's the point, Mr. Kade.
She replied, her tone calm but detached. No, I snapped, my voice rising. You don't understand. This isn't some lesson or some punishment. It's a second chance. Don't you see? I can fix it. Her expression didn't change. She tilted her head slightly, watching me carefully.
Fix what?
Her life, I said, the words tumbling out in a torrent. I've been there. I've lived it. I know what she loved. I know how much her kids mean to her. I can feel it now, as if it's still happening. I know I screwed up before, but this is my chance to make it right. I can save her. Dr. Soren raised an eyebrow, her pen hovering over her clipboard.
Save her? And how exactly would you do that?
I don't know, I admitted, my voice shaking. But if you send me back, if you let me go through it again, I can do something different. I can stop myself. I can stop him, me. I can save her from dying. Please, Dr. Soren, you have to let me try. She stared at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. The silence stretched, the hum of the machinery filling the room like an oppressive weight.
You don't understand,
she said finally, her voice quieter now.
Renee is dead.
Her words were like a slap, sharp and stinging. No, I said, shaking my head. No, you're wrong. She doesn't have to be. If you send me back, I can...
She's dead. She's been dead for years, Mr. Kade. Nothing you do in the simulations will change that.
The air seemed to leave the room. No, I whispered. You're lying. Her expression softened, just slightly, as if she almost pitied me.
I'm not lying. The woman whose life you've been experiencing is gone. You killed her. That's the reality.
I shot up in the chair, the restraints cutting into my wrists. No, I shouted. You don't get it. I can feel her. I can feel the love she had for her kids, the way she laughed, the way she lived. It's not just memories, it's real. She's still alive in there. I can save her if you let me try. Dr. Soren didn't move, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to my desperation.
That's not how this works. The simulations are designed to make you feel as though you're living those moments, but they are still just that. Simulations. The real Renee is gone. You can't bring her back.
Her words felt like knives, each one cutting deeper than the last. I slumped back in the chair, my chest heaving, my mind reeling. But it's not fair, I said hoarsely, my voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know what I was taking from her. I didn't feel it then. I didn't understand.
That's why you're here, to understand, to feel what you refused to before.
I stared at the floor, my fists clenching and unclenching. What's the point then? If I can't save her, if I can't undo what I did, then why make me go through this? Why make me feel all of it if there's nothing I can do?
Because it's not about her. It's about you.
Her words hung in the air, heavy and unforgiving.
You took her life.
She continued, her voice steady but unrelenting.
You ended something beautiful, something precious, and now you're finally seeing the weight of that. The pain, the joy, the love. It was hers, and you stole it from her. You can't fix her, Mr. Kade, but you can fix yourself.
I looked up at her, my chest tight. How?
By changing. By confronting the truth of what you've done, and becoming someone who won't take from others again.
I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. That's not enough. It'll never be enough.
No, it won't. Nothing will ever be enough to undo what you did. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try.
I leaned back in the chair, my mind spinning. The weight of her words pressed down on me, suffocating and relentless. The memories of Renee's life flickered through my mind, her children's laughter, the warmth of the sun in her garden, the love that filled every corner of her world. It was a life I could never touch, a world I could never belong to, and yet I had felt it. For a brief, fleeting moment, I had lived it. I don't know if I can do this, I said finally, my voice trembling. It's too much. It's all too much. Dr. Soren leaned forward, her gaze piercing.
You've already started, Mr. Kade. The fact that you feel this way, that you're willing to confront it, shows that you're capable of more than you think.
I closed my eyes, the weight of it all crashing down on me, the guilt, the shame, the unbearable loss. It was like a tidal wave pulling me under, drowning me in its depths. But somewhere in the darkness, a faint glimmer of something remained. Hope. Not for Renee, not for the life I'd destroyed, but for me. I'll do it, I said finally, my voice barely audible. I'll keep going. Dr. Soren nodded, her expression unreadable once again.
Good. We're making progress.
As the helmet descended once more, I took a deep, shuddering breath. The light enveloped me, pulling me back into the simulation, back into the weight of what I'd done. And this time, I didn't fight it. As the helmet descended once more, I took a deep, shuddering breath. The light enveloped me, pulling me back into the simulation, back into the weight of what I'd done. When the brightness faded, I was standing in my apartment, the same old place, peeling paint, sagging furniture, and the sour smell of mildew mixed with stale beer. But this time it didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a challenge. I moved through the space with purpose, kicking aside a crumpled jacket on the floor and brushing the dust off the countertop. My reflection in the cracked mirror above the sink caught my attention. I stepped closer, staring at the face that had become a symbol of everything broken. The unkempt beard, the hollow eyes, the grease-slicked hair. This isn't who I am anymore, I muttered. I grabbed a razor from the cluttered bathroom shelf and set to work. The scrape of the blade against my skin was almost therapeutic, revealing the face I'd hidden beneath weeks, months of neglect. Next, I combed my hair, taming the wild strands into something presentable. I opened my closet, rifling through the wrinkled, mismatched clothes until I found a pair of dark jeans and a button-down shirt. The shirt still smelled faintly of fabric softener, a ghost of a better time. When I was finished, I stood back and looked at myself in the mirror. The man staring back wasn't perfect, but he looked like someone who was trying, someone who could be better. The sun was just starting to dip below the horizon when I arrived at the supermarket. The air was crisp and the chatter of people moving in and out of the store filled the parking lot. I grabbed a cart and stepped inside, the fluorescent lights casting their artificial glow over the aisles. I wandered the store, my mind racing. I didn't know if she'd even be here. It was a gamble, but one I was willing to take. And then I saw her. Renee. She was in the produce section, her kids trailing behind her. Jacob was attempting to juggle 2 apples, much to Lily's dismay, who was trying to wrestle one out of his hand. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. The memory of her fear flashed in my mind, the way her eyes had widened when she'd seen me before. But this time, I was different. I approached slowly, pushing my cart toward hers. "Need a hand with that?" I asked, my voice steady and calm. She looked up, startled at first, but then her expression softened. Recognition flickered in her eyes, but not fear.
"Oh, that's sweet of you, but we've got it,"
she said, smiling politely. Jacob dropped an apple, and it rolled toward my feet. I bent down and picked it up, handing it back to him. "Nice catch," I said with a grin. He laughed nervously, looking to his mom for approval. "Really, it's no trouble," I said, meeting Renee's eyes. "Kids and groceries can be a lot to juggle." She hesitated, then nodded.
"All right, thank you."
I pushed the cart while she guided her kids through the aisles. We chatted casually, about nothing in particular at first. She mentioned how her daughter was obsessed with carrots lately, and I laughed, saying how picky kids could be. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't a threat, like I wasn't the man who had caused her so much pain. When we reached the checkout line, I summoned every ounce of courage I had. "This might sound forward," I began, "but would you and the kids like to have dinner with me tonight? My treat. There's a place just around the corner." Her eyebrows shot up in surprise, and I quickly added, "It's okay if you say no. I just figured it'd be nice to have a meal together. You and the kids seem like great company." She studied me for a moment, and I felt like I was holding my breath. Finally, she smiled.
"You know what? That sounds nice. Sure."
The restaurant was cozy, one of those family-owned places with checkered tablecloths and the warm smell of freshly baked bread. We sat in a booth near the window, the soft glow of the streetlights outside casting a gentle light over the table. Jacob and Lily sat across from me, their laughter and playful banter filling the space. Renee was radiant, her smile lighting up the room. She seemed relaxed, happy, and I felt a warmth in my chest I hadn't known in years. The conversation flowed easily. Renee talked about her work, the challenges of being a single mom, and her kids' antics. I shared a few stories of my own, carefully curated ones that painted me as someone worth knowing. Jacob asked if I liked baseball, and we bonded over a shared love for the sport. Lily showed me a drawing she'd made, and I told her she had the makings of a great artist. For a moment, it felt real, like I was part of something good. After dinner, we lingered outside the restaurant, the cool night air brushing against our skin.
"Thank you. It's been a long time since we've had a night like this. It meant a lot."
"It meant a lot to me, too," I said, my voice equally quiet. She smiled, and for a moment I felt like I'd finally done something right. "Mom," Jacob piped up suddenly, tugging on Renee's sleeve, "can we take a photo? All of us, with him." Renee hesitated, her gaze flickering toward me, her lips parting as if to protest. But then, seeing the eagerness in Jacob's eyes, she relented, her smile returning.
"All right,"
she said softly. I reached into my pocket, pulling out my cell phone. My hands trembled slightly as I unlocked the screen, but I quickly masked it with a grin. "Sure," I said. "Let's take a selfie and I'll send it to you." The kids scrambled to my side, Jacob beaming and Lily clutching her stuffed rabbit tightly. Renee stood behind them, her smile warm but hesitant. I stretched my arm out, angling the phone to frame all of us. "All right, everyone, say cheese." "Cheese?" The kids chimed in unison, their voices ringing with joy. The camera clicked, capturing the moment, a fleeting slice of happiness, of normalcy. I lowered the phone, my chest tight with an emotion I couldn't name. "Here, Jacob," I said, pulling up the photo. "Let me send it to you." As I tapped on the screen, attaching the photo to the message, the world shifted. The warm glow of the restaurant lights dimmed. The laughter of her children faded into an eerie silence. I froze, my fingers hovering over the screen as the air around me grew heavy, suffocating. And then, I was no longer standing in the restaurant. The fracture. I blinked, and suddenly I wasn't standing outside the restaurant anymore. I was in the bar. The familiar stench of smoke and sweat filled the air. The low hum of voices grew louder, harsher, the sound of glass breaking somewhere in the background. I turned, and there she was, Renee standing by the bar, her expression tense. "No," I whispered, my chest tightening. "Not again." But it was happening. I saw myself across the room, wild-eyed and drunk, my hand reaching for the gun at my hip. "Stop!" I screamed, running toward her, but my legs felt heavy, the space between us stretching impossibly far. The gunshot rang out, deafening and final. I watched, helpless, as Renee crumpled to the floor, her eyes wide with shock and pain. Her blood pooled beneath her, dark and spreading, her breath shallow and labored. "No!" I shouted, falling to my knees beside her. "Please, no!" Her eyes locked onto mine, filled with fear and confusion.
"Why?"
she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry," I choked out, tears streaming down my face. "I'm so sorry." The simulation ended abruptly, yanking me back into the chair. I gasped for air, my chest heaving, my body trembling violently. The straps dug into my wrists as I fought against them, the rage and despair boiling over inside me. Dr. Soren stood nearby, her expression calm and clinical. "Why?" I roared, my voice raw and broken. "Why did you do that? I was fixing it. I was making it better."
It's not about fixing it. It's about understanding.
"Understanding?" I shouted, struggling against the straps. "You think this is about learning some lesson? You're torturing me." I yanked harder, the chair creaking under the strain. "Put me back!" I screamed. "I'll do it right this time. I'll fix it. Put me back!" Dr. Soren shook her head, her voice cold.
It's over, Mr. Kade. You need to accept that.
"No!" I roared, finally breaking free of one of the straps. I lunged toward her, my hands trembling with fury. Before I could reach her, the door burst open and 2 guards rushed in. They grabbed me, pinning my arms behind my back as I thrashed and shouted. "Put me back!" I screamed again, my voice cracking. "Please put me back!" Dr. Soren watched silently, her expression unreadable as the guards dragged me from the room. Back in my cell, I collapsed onto the cold, hard floor, my body trembling with exhaustion. The echoes of Renee's laughter, her fear, her pain haunted me. I buried my face in my hands, the weight of it all pressing down on me like a crushing tide. I had failed, again. And this time, there was no going back. The cell was cold and silent, its grey walls pressing in on me from all sides. I sat on the edge of the narrow cot, staring at the cracks in the concrete floor. My head hung low, my hands clasped tightly together, trembling from the weight of the past simulations. I couldn't escape them. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, Renee, her laughter, her love, her fear, and the look in her eyes as I took it all away. The clang of the steel door startled me, snapping me out of my thoughts. Dr. Soren stepped inside, her hands clasped behind her back, her expression as composed as ever. I didn't move. I didn't say anything. I couldn't.
Mr. Kade,
She began, her voice calm but tinged with finality.
the experiment is over.
I looked up slowly, my throat dry and raw. Over? She nodded, stepping closer until she stood just a few feet away.
It's done. You've completed the program, and based on our analysis, you've achieved the goals we set for your rehabilitation.
Her words felt like a foreign language. I blinked at her, trying to process what she was saying. What does that mean? I asked, my voice hoarse.
It means
She said, tilting her head slightly.
you're free to go.
The words hit me like a punch to the chest. Free? I repeated, incredulous. She nodded again.
Your sentence in this facility is complete. The simulations have shown us that you've grown, that you've confronted the gravity of your actions, and that you've fundamentally changed as a person. You no longer belong here, Mr. Kade.
No, I said, shaking my head. No, you're wrong. Dr. Soren's eyebrows arched slightly.
Am I?
You can't just let me go, I stammered, my hands clenching into fists. I haven't fixed anything. I haven't made things right. She sighed softly, her calm demeanor unshaken.
There's nothing to fix, Mr. Kade. The past cannot be undone. You've faced the consequences of your actions through the simulations, and you've come to understand the pain you caused. That's the point of this program, to create understanding, to foster change.
I stood abruptly, the legs of the cot scraping against the floor. But it's not enough, I shouted. Don't you get it? I've seen her. I've felt her love, her fear. I killed her. And you want me to just walk out of here like it's over? Like I'm suddenly a better person? No. Dr. Soren watched me quietly, her expression unreadable. You have to send me back, I said, my voice breaking. Put me back into the simulation. Let me fix it. Let me save her. She shook her head.
That's not possible.
Why not? I demanded.
Because Renee is gone, Mr. Kade. She's been gone for years. Nothing you do in the simulation or outside of it will change that. You can't bring her back.
Her words felt like knives, each one cutting deeper than the last. I took a shaky step toward her, desperation clawing at my chest. Please, I begged. I'll do anything. Just give me one more chance. Let me try again.
There's nothing more to try. The experiment isn't about fixing the past. It's about creating a future where you won't repeat it.
I dropped to my knees, my hands clasped together as if in prayer. Dr. Soren, I'm begging you. I can't live with this. I can't walk out of here knowing what I've done. Please let me go back. Let me make it right. She crouched down, meeting my eyes. For the first time, there was something close to compassion in her gaze.
Mr. Kade, what you're feeling is guilt. And that guilt is proof that the program worked. You've changed. You've become someone who understands the value of what you took. But no amount of guilt will undo the past. The only thing you can do now is move forward.
I shook my head violently, tears streaming down my face. I don't know how. I don't know how to move forward after everything I've done.
You start by leaving this place, by building a life where you never harm anyone again. That's how you honor her.
Her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. 2 guards appeared in the doorway, their presence a stark reminder of the reality I'd been living in. It's time, Dr. Soren said, standing and gesturing toward the door. I remained on my knees, my body trembling, my mind a whirlwind of regret and despair. I can't, I whispered. I can't just leave.
Yes, you can, and you will.
The guards stepped forward, helping me to my feet. My legs felt like lead, my chest tight with the weight of everything I'd experienced. Where do I even go? I asked, my voice barely audible.
That's up to you. But know this, you're no longer a prisoner. You're free, Mr. Kade. What you do with that freedom is your choice.
The guards escorted me down the long hallway, stopping at a small room near the exit. One of them unlocked a metal cabinet and pulled out a plastic bag, placing it on the table in front of me. Your belongings, he said curtly. I stared at the bag for a moment before reaching for it. Inside were the remnants of my old life, my clothes, worn and familiar, and my cell phone, its screen smudged and dusty. A crumpled wallet with a few faded bills and a photo inside. Keys to a place that no longer existed. I ran my fingers over the items, the weight of them oddly grounding. They felt foreign and familiar all at once, like artifacts of a person I no longer recognized. The guards waited as I changed into my old clothes. The fabric felt strange against my skin, rough and ill-fitting after years in the facility's uniform. I tucked my phone and wallet into my pocket, the weight of them pressing against my thigh like ghosts. The guards motioned for me to follow, and I complied without a word. The walk to the exit felt surreal. The corridors of the facility, once so suffocating, now seemed impossibly vast. The guards flanked me silently, their presence a strange comfort as I moved closer to a world I hadn't seen in years. At the final door, one of them paused, his hand resting on the latch. He glanced at me briefly, as if expecting me to say something. I didn't. The door creaked open, and sunlight flooded the space, blinding me momentarily. I stepped outside, the cool breeze brushing against my skin, the scent of fresh air filling my lungs. For a moment I just stood there, staring at the horizon. The sky was a brilliant shade of blue, the sun warm against my face. It felt unreal. I turned back toward the door, half expecting Dr. Soren to be standing there watching me. But she was gone. I was alone. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I was truly alone. I took a deep breath, my chest tight with a strange mix of fear and hope. And then, slowly, I began to walk. The apartment smelled the same. Stale air, faint mildew, the lingering tang of cigarettes I hadn't smoked in years. It was all still here, like it had been waiting for me, unchanged by the world outside. I tossed the bag onto the couch, a sagging, threadbare relic of my old life, and stood in the center of the room, staring at nothing. The silence wrapped around me like a noose, tightening with every second. The guilt was suffocating me. But it wasn't just the guilt. It was something else, something I hadn't felt before, something worse. I think I'm in love with someone I killed. For years in prison, I felt nothing. I didn't care about her, not about her life, her kids, her family. I didn't care about me either. The anger I carried in those days had burned everything else away, leaving me hollow. I convinced myself it wasn't my fault. She had gotten in the way. She had made a mistake. She had ruined my life by standing there, by dying. But now, all of that was gone. Now, I saw her face everywhere. I heard her laughter in the quiet of the apartment, saw her smile in the dim glow of the bare bulb above me. I felt her love in the silence, and her fear, that fear. The way she looked at me in the supermarket, at the bar, her wide, terrified eyes burned into my mind. She had been afraid of me, of what I might do, and she was right to be. Now she's gone, and so am I. I couldn't stay in the apartment. The walls felt like they were closing in, her voice echoing off the cracked paint and peeling plaster. I grabbed my coat and walked out into the night, the cool air biting at my face. I ended up at the bar, the same bar. It hadn't changed either. The sticky floors, the cracked leather stools, the faint smell of spilled beer and stale sweat. It was like stepping back into that night, like the bar had been preserved in amber, waiting for me to return. I hesitated at the door, my heart pounding in my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to run, but I couldn't. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The bartender didn't recognize me, or maybe he did and didn't care. He slid a glass across the counter without a word, the amber liquid sloshing slightly as it stopped in front of me. I drank. The first glass burned on the way down, but it didn't hurt enough. I motioned for another. The second glass went down smoother, and by the third, the edges of the room began to blur. But it wasn't enough. The memories didn't stop. Her voice, her laughter, her fear. I drank more. Each glass was another futile attempt to drown the thoughts, to silence the endless loop of guilt and grief in my head. But the alcohol didn't work. It only made it worse. I saw her everywhere, at the edge of my vision, her auburn hair. In the laughter of the people at the next table, her voice. In the mirror behind the bar, her green eyes staring back at me wide with fear. At some point, I stumbled to the bathroom. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glare on the cracked tiles. I gripped the edges of the sink, my knuckles white, my breath coming in shallow gasps. "You killed her," I muttered, my voice barely audible over the hum of the lights. I stared at my reflection, at the man I had become, the bloodshot eyes, the unshaven jaw, the empty shell staring back at me. "I killed her," I said again, louder this time. My hand shot out, slamming into the mirror. It shattered under my fist, shards of glass raining down into the sink. Blood welled up from the cuts on my knuckles, dripping onto the porcelain. But I didn't feel it. I stumbled back into the bar, my head spinning. The world swayed around me, the noise of the patrons blending into a cacophony of sound that made my skull ache. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the gun. It was heavy, cold, a familiar weight in my hand. I stared at it, my vision blurring as tears filled my eyes. I wasn't going to hurt anyone else. Not again. This time I would fix it. This time I would finish it. I raised the gun to my temple, my finger trembling on the trigger. The bar fell silent. I could feel their eyes on me, their whispers cutting through the haze in my mind. But it didn't matter. None of it mattered. I closed my eyes and exhaled, my finger tightening on the trigger. "Don't," someone said, their voice soft but firm. I opened my eyes, my breath hitching. It wasn't her. It couldn't be her. But for a moment, I thought it was. The bartender was standing in front of me now, his hands raised slightly, his expression cautious. "You don't want to do this," he said. "Yes, I do," I muttered, my voice shaking. "No, you don't," he said again. "Put it down." My hand wavered, the barrel of the gun dipping slightly. "I killed her," I said, my voice breaking. "I killed her, and I can't—" "I know," he said, cutting me off. "But this isn't the way." I don't remember leaving the bar. Somehow I ended up back in my apartment and collapsed onto the couch. I stared up at the cracked ceiling, my chest heaving with silent sobs. The guilt had swallowed me whole, and now there was nothing left. I didn't know how I fell asleep, but when I woke up, the apartment was shrouded in the cold, gray light of morning. My head throbbed, a dull, relentless pounding that seemed to echo the chaos in my mind. My mouth was dry, my stomach churned from the stale liquor, and my limbs felt like lead. The world outside the cracked window was quiet, muffled by the suffocating stillness of the room. But it wasn't the headache that woke me. It was the emptiness, the kind of emptiness that consumes you whole, that strips away every last shred of purpose or meaning, the kind of emptiness that whispers, "You don't belong here anymore." I sat up slowly, clutching my head as the dizziness hit me. My vision blurred, and for a moment I thought I might pass out again. But the pounding in my chest was too loud, too insistent. This was it. I couldn't keep going. The guilt was suffocating me, wrapping itself around my throat like a noose. It wasn't just the guilt, though. It was her, Renee. I had taken everything from her, the warmth of her laughter, the love she gave so freely to her children, the life she had built with such care. I hadn't just killed her. I had stolen the world she carried, and now I carried it too. And it was killing me. I stumbled to the bathroom, my feet dragging across the worn carpet. The mirror above the sink was cracked, the jagged lines splitting my reflection into pieces. I barely recognized the man staring back at me. My eyes were bloodshot, the skin around them hollow and dark. My beard had already started to grow back, uneven and untamed. But it didn't matter. None of it mattered anymore. I walked back into the main room, pulling open the drawer of the small table beside the couch. My hands trembled as I reached inside and pulled out the gun. It felt heavier than I remembered, its cold weight grounding me, anchoring me to the moment. I sat down on the couch, the springs groaning under my weight. This was it. Here in this apartment, no one would see. No one would stop me. No one would help. And no one would care. They'd find my body days later, maybe weeks. The smell would tip off a neighbor, or someone would come looking for the overdue rent. That was all I would leave behind, a mess for someone else to clean up. I held the gun in my lap, staring at it, my hands trembling as the cold metal pressed against my palms. I thought of her, Renee, her laughter, her fear, her blood pooling on the floor. I lifted the gun, my arms shaking as I pressed the barrel against my temple. No, I muttered, my voice barely audible. This wasn't enough. I wanted it to hurt. I wanted to feel the pain she must have felt. I wanted to suffer like she had suffered. I shifted the gun, sliding it into my mouth. The cold barrel pressed against my tongue, sharp and unforgiving. My breathing quickened, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode before I even pulled the trigger. Tears streamed down my face as I gripped the gun tighter, my finger hovering over the trigger. "This is it," I whispered, the words muffled. "This is how it ends." And then something flickered in my mind. The photo. I froze, my finger trembling on the trigger. The photo, the one we took in the simulation. It had been so vivid, so real. Jacob had asked for it, his voice full of excitement. We had all smiled, our faces glowing in the warm light of the restaurant. It had felt real, because it was real. I pulled the gun out of my mouth, gasping for air as I leaned forward, my hands clutching my knees. My chest heaved, and my pulse pounded in my ears. That photo was the only thing that could prove I wasn't losing my mind. That photo would show me that I wasn't just imagining things. I stood up, stumbling toward the bag I had dropped on the couch. My hands fumbled with the zipper, the tremors making it harder to grip. Finally, I pulled out my phone, my fingers shaking as I turned it on. The screen flickered to life, its cracked surface distorting the faint glow. I opened the gallery, scrolling through the sparse images. And then I found it. There it was. The photo. Jacob and Lily smiling brightly, Lily clutching her stuffed rabbit. Renee stood behind them, her smile soft but radiant. And there I was, on the edge of the frame, smiling like I belonged there. It was real. It had to be real. I stared at the image, my hands trembling as tears blurred my vision. For the first time in what felt like years, a spark of something ignited in my chest. Hope. "I can fix it," I whispered, clutching the phone to my chest. "I can fix it." I didn't know how. I didn't know if it was even possible, but I had to try. The photo was proof. Proof that I wasn't completely lost, that there was still something worth fighting for. I sat back down on the couch, the gun lying forgotten on the table. For the first time since leaving the facility, the crushing weight of guilt lifted slightly. It was still there, pressing against my ribs, but now it was accompanied by something else. Determination. The photo haunted me. It wasn't just the image itself, it was what it meant. It was proof that I wasn't losing my mind, that the simulations were more than just manufactured memories. They had bled into something real. Jacob's smile was burned into my thoughts. Lily, clutching her stuffed rabbit, Renee's hesitant but radiant expression, all of it flickered behind my eyes every time I blinked. I had to know. I had to see Jacob, to make sure this wasn't some twisted fragment of my imagination. The house was the same. I stood on the sidewalk, staring at the white siding and neatly trimmed lawn, the swing set still standing in the corner of the yard. It was a snapshot of the life I'd lived as her, a memory so vivid I could feel the warmth of the sunlight that had poured through the kitchen windows. But the house was quiet now. No laughter, no voices, no movement. I crossed the street, my heart pounding as I climbed the steps to the porch. I hesitated for a moment before knocking. The sound echoed in the silence. I waited, each second stretching into an eternity. Finally, the door creaked open, and a middle-aged man peeked out, his face weary and cautious. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice gruff. "I'm looking for Jacob and Lily," I said, my voice trembling slightly. I stopped myself. What could I say? "What? They're not here anymore," the man said, his expression hardening. "They moved in with their grandmother after everything." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I nodded mutely, mumbling a quick thank you before turning away. Her mom's house, of course. I remembered it from the simulation, the warm, inviting space filled with the scent of baked goods and the soft hum of Renee's voice. I had been there as her. I knew the way. The drive to her mother's house felt like a dream. The roads blurred past, my mind spinning with memories, both mine and hers. By the time I parked across the street, my hands were trembling so badly, I had to grip the steering wheel just to steady myself. The house was smaller than I remembered, its paint slightly chipped, the garden overgrown. But it was unmistakable. I didn't dare knock. I didn't want to scare them. Instead, I waited. Hours passed as I sat in my car, watching the house from a distance. Finally, just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, the door opened and Jacob stepped outside. He was older now, taller, thinner, his features sharper and more defined. His hair was longer, unkempt, and his clothes hung loose on his frame. He had a backpack slung over one shoulder, his expression hard and closed off as he walked down the driveway. I followed him at a distance, my heart pounding with each step. He walked to a corner store first, disappearing inside for a few minutes, before emerging with a bottle tucked under his arm. Then he continued down the street, cutting through an alley that led to an abandoned lot. I watched as he pulled something from his pocket, a small bag, and began rolling a joint with quick, practiced movements. My chest tightened. It wasn't just the drugs. It was the way he moved, the hardness in his expression, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. This wasn't the Jacob I remembered. This wasn't the boy who had begged for a photo in the restaurant, who had laughed with his sister and clung to his mother's side. This was someone else, someone broken. I stepped forward, my voice shaking as I called out, "Jacob!" He froze, his head snapping up, his eyes locked onto mine, narrowing with suspicion.
"What the hell are you doing here?"
He demanded, his voice sharp and defensive. "It's me," I said, raising my hands in a gesture of peace. I was at the supermarket and the restaurant." For a moment, his expression flickered with recognition, but it was quickly replaced by something darker. His entire body tensed, his fists clenching at his sides.
"You!"
he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Jacob," I began, my voice soft but steady. "I just want to talk, But I didn't get the chance to finish. He lunged at me, his movements fast and wild. His fist connected with my chest and I stumbled back, barely managing to keep my balance. Before I could react, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a knife, the blade glinting in the faint light of the street lamp. The knife sliced through the air and I barely dodged in time. "Jacob, stop!" I shouted, my voice echoing in the empty lot.
"You killed her!"
He screamed, his voice raw and cracking. His movements were frenzied, the knife flashing again as he swung it toward me.
"You killed my mom!"
The words hit me like a sledgehammer. I stumbled backward, my hands raised in defense. Jacob, listen to me, I pleaded. It's not what you think.
Not what I think.
He snarled, his eyes blazing with fury.
I saw you at the supermarket, at the restaurant. I thought you were someone else. I thought you were a good guy. But I know who you are now.
His voice broke, his hand shaking as he swung the knife again.
You're the one who killed her.
I reacted instinctively, grabbing his wrist as the knife came toward me. Stop! I shouted, struggling to wrestle the blade away. Jacob, stop this right now! He fought against me, his strength fueled by rage and grief.
You don't get to tell me to stop.
He screamed, his face inches from mine.
You don't get to tell me anything? You ruined everything. You took her away from me.
The knife clattered to the ground as I twisted his wrist and I pulled him into a tight embrace, pinning his arms to his sides. Jacob, listen to me, I shouted, my voice trembling. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help you. He struggled against me, his body shaking with rage.
Let me go!
He cried, his voice cracking.
Let me go, you bastard!
No, I said firmly, holding him tighter. I'm not letting go. I'm not going to hurt you, Jacob. I swear to you. His struggles grew weaker, his breath coming in ragged gasps.
I hate you. I hate you so much.
I know, I whispered, my voice breaking. I know you do, and I deserve it, but I'm not going to fight you. I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to help. He stopped struggling, his body going limp in my arms. His sobs were muffled, his tears soaking into my shirt. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I'm sorry, I whispered, my voice shaking. I can't change what happened. I can't bring her back. But I promise you, Jacob, I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. He pulled back slightly, his tear-streaked face twisted with anger and grief.
You can't fix this. She's gone. You took her away, and now nothing will ever be the same.
I know, I said, my heart shattering with every word. I know I can't bring her back, but I can make sure you and Lily never have to feel this kind of pain again. I can make sure you don't lose anything else. His eyes searched mine, his expression a mixture of anger, sadness, and something I couldn't quite place, something wild and broken.
You promise?
He asked finally, his voice barely audible, shaking with emotion. I promise, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. For a moment I thought he believed me. I thought the storm in his eyes might settle, even if just for a second. But then something shifted. A spark of realization flared behind his gaze, turning the sadness into something sharper, darker, rage.
You think a promise is enough? You think you can fix this?
Jacob, wait, I started, taking a step closer.
You killed her!
He screamed, his voice raw and filled with fury.
You killed my mom, and you think you get to walk away?
He wrenched himself free of my reach and stumbled back, his breath ragged, his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white.
I swear to God,
he said, his voice shaking with rage.
I'm going to kill you. Do you hear me? I'll kill you for what you did.
Jacob! I called after him, desperation clawing at my throat. But he was already running. His sneakers pounded against the pavement as he bolted toward the house, his screams echoing into the night.
I'll kill you! You hear me? I'll kill you!
I stood frozen, my chest tight, my hands trembling. Jacob, please. I whispered into the empty darkness, my voice swallowed by the silence that followed. The driveway felt endless, the air cold and sharp against my skin. I could still hear his words reverberating in my head, looping over and over until I thought I might lose my mind.
You killed her. I'll kill you.
The rage in his voice had been a physical thing, alive, breathing, burning through every wall I'd tried to build between my past and the man I was trying to become. I wanted to chase him, to make him listen, to beg him to believe that I was trying. But I knew it was too late. I had seen it in his eyes. Jacob didn't want my promise. He wanted justice. He wanted revenge. And part of me knew he deserved it. I had taken everything from him, his mother, his family, his childhood. And now, when he looked at me, all he saw was a monster. All I saw was one too. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think. Jacob's words rang in my ears like a death sentence. You killed her. I'll kill you. But beneath his rage was a truth I couldn't ignore anymore. This was real. The simulation wasn't some experiment playing games with my mind. The photo I carried in my phone wasn't just a figment of AI-generated memory. It was real. And if it was real, then there had to be a way back. There had to be a way to fix it. Dr. Soren. She was the key. She was the one who had put me into the machine, who had shown me what I didn't want to see. But she didn't understand. She thought it was all just a lesson, a psychological game to make me feel guilt and remorse. But I knew. I felt it, and I had proof. I grabbed the phone from the table, staring at the photo one more time. Jacob's smile, Lily's rabbit, Renee's hesitant warmth. It burned in my chest, a mixture of hope and desperation, the last fragile thread tethering me to sanity. Dr. Soren had to see it, and if she didn't believe me, I would make her. The plan. I spent the morning preparing. I went through the drawers, the cabinets, every forgotten crevice of the apartment, until I found it, my old gun. The same one I had tried to use on myself just days before. I turned it over in my hands, feeling the weight of it, the cold metal pressing into my palm. I didn't want to use it. I wasn't here to hurt anyone, but I needed to be ready. I tucked the gun into my jacket, grabbed my phone, and left the apartment. The drive to the facility felt surreal, like a dream I couldn't wake up from. The sun hung low on the horizon, shrouded in gray clouds that threatened rain. The closer I got, the harder my heart pounded, as if my body knew the gravity of what I was about to do. I parked a block away, waiting until the facility's evening shift began. The place was sprawling and fortified, with guards patrolling its edges, but I didn't need to get inside. Not yet. I just needed her. The waiting game. The parking lot was dimly lit, the street lamps humming faintly overhead. I crouched in the shadows beside a line of cars, my eyes fixed on the entrance. The guards were relaxed, chatting with each other or distracted by their phones. This was just another day to them, another shift guarding a place filled with secrets they would never understand. But I understood. The photo in my pocket burned like a live coal. I clutched my phone tightly, my hands clammy with sweat as I watched the doors. The minutes crawled by, every sound amplified, the crunch of gravel, the hiss of wind through the trees. And then I saw her, Dr. Soren. She walked briskly through the front doors, her coat pulled tightly around her shoulders. She looked exactly the same, sharp, composed, clinical, like the weight of everything she did here never touched her. I rose slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. My hand hovered over the gun in my pocket. Not yet. She reached her car, unlocking it with a chirp. The sound echoed through the empty lot, and in that moment, I stepped into the light. Dr. Soren, she froze, the keys slipping from her hand and clattering onto the pavement. Her head snapped toward me, her expression flickering from shock to wariness in an instant.
Mr. Kade, what are you doing here?
I took a slow step forward, pulling the gun from my jacket and holding it at my side. I didn't point it at her, but the message was clear. "Don't scream," I said, my voice hoarse. "I'm not here to hurt you, but you need to listen to me." Her eyes darted to the gun, then back to my face.
Put the weapon down, Mr. Kade. This won't end well for you.
"It's not about me," I snapped, my voice shaking. "It's about her, about Renee, and her kids." She stilled, the wary professionalism faltering slightly as confusion crept across her features.
What are you talking about?
I pulled out my phone, holding it up so she could see the photo on the screen. "This, look at this." Dr. Soren glanced at the image, her brows furrowing.
What am I looking at?
"You think it was all a simulation," I said, my voice trembling with urgency. "But this photo, it's real. I was there. Jacob asked me to take it. I sent it to him. It's proof, don't you see?" She straightened, her skepticism returning.
That's not possible. You're confused, Mr. Kade. A photo can be manipulated, fabricated. You're clinging to something that isn't real.
It is real, I shouted, stepping closer. I lived it. I felt it. And if you don't believe me, I'll prove it to you. Dr. Soren's eyes flicked to the gun, but I didn't raise it. Get in the car, I said. You're going to see for yourself. She didn't argue. I could see the gears turning in her mind, calculating her options. But she climbed into the driver's seat. I slid into the passenger side, my grip on the gun firm but loose.
Where are we going?
She asked, her voice cold and measured. To her mother's house, I said, where Jacob and Lily live now. She started the car, the engine rumbling to life. The drive was silent except for the low hum of the road beneath the tires. I could feel her stealing glances at me, her mind working to process what was happening.
This is madness, Mr. Kade. You're chasing something that doesn't exist.
It exists, I said firmly, and when you see them, you'll know. The drive to the house was heavy with tension. The hum of the car engine and the occasional crackle of the police radio were the only sounds as Dr. Soren kept her eyes on the road. Her knuckles were white against the steering wheel, her lips pressed into a tight line. I sat in the passenger seat, clutching my phone so tightly that my fingers ached. The photo was still pulled up on the screen, Jacob and Lily's faces staring back at me, frozen in that moment of joy. This is where they live, I said, breaking the silence. She didn't respond immediately. Her gaze flicked toward me for the briefest moment, her eyes sharp and unreadable.
I've been reviewing your case,
she said, her tone clipped and deliberate. My stomach twisted. And?
You never met them. The woman you killed, Renee Porter, was a stranger to you. You had no personal connection to her before the night of the incident, and you've never met her children, not once.
That's not true, I said, my voice rising. I held up the phone, the photo shaking in my trembling hand. I've met them. I've seen them. Jacob and Lily, her kids. I was there with them.
In the simulation?
She countered, her voice cool.
In Cognify. That doesn't mean it was real. It doesn't mean...
It was real, I snapped, cutting her off. You think you know everything because you read some files, because you've got numbers and reports, but you don't feel it. You don't know what it's like to live it. Her lips thinned further, her grip tightening on the wheel.
The mind can be deceived, Mr. Kade. Memories, especially implanted ones, feel real. That's the entire point of the process.
Then what about this? I thrust the phone toward her, the photo glaring in the dim light of the car. What about this proof? Can you explain this away? Can you just write this off as a fabricated memory? She didn't answer. We pulled up to the house in silence. The house stood at the end of the street, its front porch light glowing faintly against the night. It looked smaller than I remembered, more worn, as though the weight of grief had settled into its very foundation. This is it, I said, gesturing toward the driveway. Dr. Soren parked the car and turned off the engine. The quiet was deafening.
What do you expect to find here?
She asked, her voice low. The truth, I said simply. She sighed, glancing toward the house before looking back at me. Her expression was sharp, skeptical, but there was something else beneath it, something uncertain.
Fine. Let's get this over with.
We climbed the driveway, the gravel crunching under our feet. My heart pounded in my chest, each step feeling heavier than the last. I tucked the gun deeper into my jacket, hidden from sight. The last thing I wanted was to scare anyone. I raised a hand and knocked on the door. The sound was loud, echoing into the quiet night. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door creaked open and a figure stepped into the light. It was Jacob. His eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. He looked different, older, angrier. His face was sharper now, his jaw clenched tight, his expression hard and cold.
You!
He said, his voice low and venomous. Jacob, I started, raising my hands in a gesture of peace. But before I could say another word, he lunged. The impact knocked the breath out of me as Jacob slammed me against the porch railing. His fists were a flurry of wild blows, each one fueled by a rage that had been simmering for years.
You killed her!
He screamed, his voice cracking with emotion.
You killed my mom!
I raised my arms to block his strikes, my voice desperate. "Jacob, stop, please."
You think you can just show up here?
He shouted, his fists pounding against my chest.
You think you can just walk into my life after what you did?
Dr. Soren grabbed his arm, her voice sharp.
Jacob, stop this right now.
He wrenched free of her grip, turning to face her with a glare.
Who the hell are you?
I'm Dr. Soren. I work with him. I need to ask you something.
You work with him?
Jacob spat, his voice dripping with disbelief.
Are you kidding me? Do you know who this is? He's the man who murdered my mom.
Her face remained impassive, but her eyes flicked toward me, uncertainty flickering in her expression.
Jacob, do you remember taking a photo with him at the restaurant?
What?
Jacob said, his brow furrowing. "The photo," I said quickly, pulling out my phone. "You asked me to take it. You, Lily, your mom, we took it together. It wasn't just in the simulation. It was real." I held up the phone, the screen glowing in the faint light. Jacob stared at it, his jaw tightening, his hands trembling at his sides.
I don't understand.
He said, his voice shaking.
How do you have that?
"Because I was there," I said, stepping closer. "You remember, don't you? The supermarket, the restaurant. I was with you." He shook his head, his breathing uneven.
It doesn't make sense. None of this makes sense.
Dr. Soren crouched slightly, her voice softening.
Jacob, think carefully. Do you remember him being there? Do you remember him talking to your mom, sitting with you and Lily?
Jacob's shoulders slumped, the rage draining out of him.
Yeah, I remember.
The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Soren straightened, her face pale. She looked at me, her skepticism cracking as something close to fear crept into her eyes.
This shouldn't be possible.
"But it is," I said firmly, my voice trembling with a mixture of relief and desperation. "You believe me now, don't you? You believe me." She didn't respond. Instead, she turned and walked back to the car. The drive back to the facility. The ride was silent. Dr. Soren's hands gripped the wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her jaw was clenched, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, but I could see the turmoil brewing beneath her calm exterior. I clutched the phone tightly, the photo still open on the screen. She had seen the truth. Jacob had confirmed it. When we pulled into the facility's parking lot, she turned off the engine and sat in silence for a moment. Finally, she looked at me, her voice barely above a whisper.
I don't know how this happened. I don't know what any of this means.
"It means you need to put me back," I said, my voice steady. Her gaze met mine, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resolve.
Come with me,
she said quietly, and together we walked into the facility. The facility buzzed with its usual cold hum, the whir of machines, the distant voices of staff behind glass walls, and the faint click of Dr. Soren's heels against the floor. She led me through the dimly lit hallway, my heartbeat a frantic rhythm in my chest. I didn't care what she had to say. I didn't care about theories, about impossibilities, or the laws of nature. All I knew was that the photo, the memories, Jacob, Lily, it was real. And if there was even the faintest chance to change it, I had to take it. Dr. Soren stopped in front of a secure door, her face lit by the faint glow of a monitor as she scanned her badge. It clicked open with a mechanical hiss, and we entered the observation room. The Cognify chair sat waiting, its sleek metal surface gleaming like a predator lying in wait. She turned to face me, arms crossed, her expression both weary and stern.
Before we proceed, you need to understand what I'm about to say.
"I don't care," I said immediately. "Just put me back, I'll fix it." Her brow furrowed, but she didn't raise her voice.
Listen to me. What you're describing, the photo, the confirmation from Jacob, defies the entire foundation of what Cognify was created to do.
"Then maybe the program did something else," I snapped, frustration bubbling over. "Maybe it made another reality. Maybe it let me travel back through time. I don't know, and I don't care." I took a step forward, desperation in every word. All I care about is saving her. You need to put me back. Please. She stared at me, studying my face as if she were trying to weigh every shred of truth in me.
You're asking me to send you into something we can't explain, something that may not follow any rules we understand.
Good, I said hoarsely, because the rules I've been living by don't work anymore. I need this. She exhaled slowly, running a hand over her face before dropping it to her side.
Fine, but there's one condition.
I froze. What?
If this works, if you save her, I want proof.
Her eyes locked onto mine, their intensity cutting through me like a blade.
You send it to me, not tomorrow, not after. You send it today, now at this exact time.
I'll do it, I said instantly, my pulse quickening. She shook her head, removing something from around her neck. A delicate chain dangling with a small silver pendant, a locket worn with age. She held it out to me, her hands steady.
This belonged to my mother. I've worn it for years. I never take it off. If you succeed, I'll know. I'll know because you'll send me this. Something I've never shared with you or anyone else.
I took the necklace carefully, the weight of it small but profound in my palm. I'll do it. I swear. Her gaze lingered on me for a long moment, as though she were memorizing my face. Then, with a curt nod, she turned to the chair. Sit down, Mr. Kade. Let's see if you can do the impossible. The straps clicked into place, pinning me to the chair, though I barely noticed. The room around me faded, the buzz of the machinery growing louder as the helmet lowered over my head. Dr. Soren's voice broke through the hum, faint and distant.
Good luck, Mr. Kade.
And then the world dissolved into light. When my vision returned, I was standing in the supermarket. The bright, artificial glow of fluorescent lights buzzed above me, and the faint hum of refrigerators filled the air. I blinked, stunned by the vividness of it all, the vibrant colors of produce, the murmur of voices around me, the weight of a shopping cart beneath my hands. And then I saw her. Renee. She was standing in front of me, her auburn hair cascading softly around her shoulders as she reached for a bag of apples. Lily and Jacob were nearby, their laughter a faint, familiar melody. For a moment I froze. The air seemed to still, and my chest tightened as the memory of her face hit me like a punch. I had seen this moment before. The first time, she had looked at me with fear. Not this time. I wiped my palms against my jeans and stepped forward, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might shatter my ribs. Need a hand with that? I said, my voice steady but soft. She turned, startled at first. Then she smiled, a warm, genuine smile that sent a ripple of relief through me.
Oh, that's sweet of you, but I've got it.
Jacob, trying to juggle apples again, dropped one, and I bent to pick it up. Here you go, I said, handing it to him with a grin. Thanks, mister, Jacob said brightly, running back to his sister. I turned back to Renee.
Honestly, it's no trouble. Groceries with kids can be a lot to handle.
She laughed softly, her eyes crinkling at the edges. You're telling me. The moment felt fragile, perfect in its simplicity. I knew what had to come next. Look, this is going to sound weird, I said, scratching the back of my neck nervously. But how about I buy you and the kids dinner tonight? No strings, I promise. Just company. She hesitated, studying me carefully. I held my breath. Then she smiled again.
Okay, sure.
The night that changed everything. Dinner was perfect in its quiet, unremarkable way. We sat in the same booth at the same restaurant. Jacob and Lily laughed and teased each other while Renee and I talked about her job, her kids, the little struggles and joys of her life. And for the first time in what felt like eternity, I wasn't a shadow of myself. I was someone real, someone good. Afterward, I offered to drive her home. She accepted, and as we pulled up to her house, the night air cool and still, I turned to her. Thank you, I said softly. Tonight meant a lot. She smiled.
For us too. It's been a long time since we've had a night like this.
And then she added,
You're different.
Different how?
Like Like someone trying to be better. Like someone who cares.
Night after night. One dinner turned into two. Two turned into four. Days slipped into weeks, and suddenly, Renee and I were sharing more than just meals. We shared laughter, stories, dreams of the future. I met her kids properly, earning their trust one joke, one small kindness at a time. I fixed the broken step on her porch. I brought flowers from time to time, bright and cheerful, just like she liked them. She let me in, and night after night, I never forgot the promise I had made to Dr. Soren. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I held her hand beneath the fading light. "Marry me," I whispered. Her eyes widened, shimmering with surprise and joy.
Are you sure?
I smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I've never been more sure of anything." And she said,
Yes.
Dr. Soren?
The voice pulled me abruptly from sleep, jagged and unrelenting. I opened my eyes, blinking against the harsh fluorescent light of the observation room. I sat slumped in a chair. Why am I here? With the Cognify machine humming softly behind the glass wall, its quiet thrum vibrating through the floor. I couldn't remember how I had ended up here, or even why I had fallen asleep. The guard's voice broke through the haze again.
Dr. Soren, I'm sorry to wake you, but someone left this for you.
I straightened, rubbing my eyes and willing my sluggish brain to catch up. The guard stood in the doorway, holding a small box, unmarked, plain, and yet off. I frowned. Who left it? He shifted uncomfortably, shaking his head.
No one knows. It was just there, sitting on the security desk. No one saw anyone come in or leave it behind.
A ripple of unease crept through me. That doesn't make sense,
I thought the same thing.
he said, stepping forward and placing the box carefully on the desk beside me.
It's addressed to you personally.
I stared at the box, the room suddenly colder, the hum of the Cognify machine louder than before. My heart beat strangely, as if it knew something I didn't. "Thank you," I muttered, dismissing the guard with a distracted wave. He hesitated, clearly unnerved, but eventually stepped out, leaving me alone. I turned the box over in my hands. No writing, no postage, nothing to identify where it had come from or who had sent it. It could have been from anyone, and yet, it felt familiar, personal. The longer I stared at it, the more my chest tightened. Why does this feel so heavy? I reached for a letter opener, the blade trembling faintly in my grip as I slid it through the tape. The sound of tearing cardboard echoed unnaturally loud in the silent room. I peeled back the flaps and froze. Inside the box, resting on a small piece of folded paper, was my necklace. I pulled it out slowly, my breath catching as the chain slid through my fingers. The silver pendant glinted faintly in the fluorescent light. I turned it over, tracing the familiar ridges, the worn edges, the tiny imperfections I knew by heart. "This isn't possible," I whispered to myself. "I never took this off. Never." I looked down at my neck instinctively, my hand flying to my collarbone. My throat felt bare, my skin cold where the chain should have rested. Why isn't it there? I tried to think, to piece together why I was even in this room, but everything felt hazy, like a half-formed dream that refused to resolve itself. My hands shook as I set the locket carefully on the desk and unfolded the small piece of paper inside the box. The handwriting was scrawled and rough, but it carried a certain weight, like every letter had been etched into the page with deliberate force.
"You did it. You made it reality. Thank you."
You can read Echoes of Redemption for free with Kindle Unlimited, or purchase your copy today. Click the link below to dive into a world of second chances and impossible possibilities. And don't forget to review the book and share your feedback on Amazon or Goodreads.